Suburban life. White fences, rose gardens, the sweet smell of freshly cut grass. It's the picture-perfect postcard that realtors sell with phrases like peaceful community and charming neighborhood. But anyone who's ever had the misfortune of joining an HOA knows the darker truth. It's less charming neighborhood and more Game of Thrones with bake sales and parking permits. And at the center of today's saga, one woman, one Lexus, and one poor neighbor whose only crime was trying to live his life without being micromanaged by a clipboard-carrying suburban tyrant. This wasn't just a petty squabble over lawn height. Oh no, this was a full-blown suburban siege. Imagine parking your car sideways across someone's garage just to flex your HOA power, and then imagine being so hated that the retaliation doesn't come in the form of a nasty email or a snarky letter, but in the form of an actual helicopter. Yes, you heard that right. We're talking about a story where a luxury SUV was literally airlifted and dropped like an Amazon package onto the lawn of the town mayor. This is HOA warfare taken to cinematic heights, a saga so ridiculous it belongs in the Smithsonian next to strangest neighborhood disputes in American history. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about an HOA Karen. This is the tale of how one neighborhood turned a Lexus into the most expensive lawn ornament in municipal history. And it all starts with Fact 1. Meet Karen, the self-proclaimed empress of cul-de-sac law. Every neighborhood has a legend. Some neighborhoods get the friendly dog walker who hands out treats to every pet on the block. Some get the retired handyman who can fix anything with duct tape and a smile. But in Maple Rest, the legend was Karen. And not the good kind of legend, like community grandma who bakes cookies for the kids. No, Karen was the legend the way Voldemort is a legend. Feared, whispered about, and only ever mentioned when something bad was about to happen. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the HOA board. Everyone else may have technically had a vote, but somehow her word always ended up being the final one. Think of her less as a president and more as a dictator with a newsletter. Her weapon wasn't an army, but a stack of violation slips, and she wielded them with a kind of glee usually reserved for reality TV judges tearing apart a nervous contestant. And she had her rituals. Every morning, while normal people sipped their coffee, Karen would set out on her suburban patrol. Not with a dog, not with a stroller, with a clipboard. It was less morning walk and more inspection tour. She'd peer into lawns, measure grass height with her eyes, and scribble notes like a field commander preparing for battle. To her, every rosebush was a potential threat to property values, every cracked driveway a personal insult to her authority. Neighbors learned quickly. Don't cross Karen. One woman forgot to pull in her trash can until after dinner. She got slapped with a $50 fine. Another dared to plant tulips instead of the HOA-approved roses. She found a sternly worded letter taped to her door. Kids playing hopscotch with sidewalk chalk? According to Karen, that was vandalism. If joy had a natural predator, it was her. But Karen wasn't just about enforcement, she was about image. Enter the Lexus, a gleaming white luxury SUV that she treated like it was part of a royal fleet. Always washed, always waxed, always parked just crooked enough across two spaces to say, "This car matters more than you." To Karen, the Lexus wasn't transportation. It was a crown jewel, a rolling billboard of her status as Queen Bee of the cul-de-sac. People whispered about her at block parties. Parents warned their kids not to play too close to the lady with the clipboard. She was part local government, part urban legend. If you squinted, you could almost imagine her HOA bylaws written in stone tablets and handed down from on high. But here's the thing about self-crowned monarchs. They always overreach. And Karen's moment came one bright Saturday morning. Our unsuspecting neighbor, coffee in hand, ready to start a peaceful day, opened his garage door and froze. There, blocking his driveway completely, was Karen's beloved Lexus. Not just parked sideways, diagonal, like some suburban roadblock. This wasn't an accident, this was a siege. And just in case the message wasn't clear enough, taped to his car was a note. Written in Karen's tight, angry script, it read, "Trim the roses or next time I'll have your car booted." This wasn't just about flowers. This was about power. Karen had crossed the line from petty nuisance to outright tyrant. She wasn't keeping the neighborhood in check anymore.
She was weaponizing her Lexus to prove dominance. And that was the moment things shifted. Because while Karen thought she had the board in her pocket and the mayor on speed dial, she forgot one crucial truth about human nature. Push someone far enough, and they'll push back. Or in this case, they'll push up. Way up. And that pushback? It starts with fact 2. When the Lexus blockade set off a plan for revenge so outrageous, even Netflix couldn't have scripted it better.
If Karen's clipboard was her sword, then the Lexus was her tank. And on that fateful morning, she rolled that tank into battle by parking it diagonally across her neighbor's garage like a velvet rope at a VIP club. Except, instead of keeping out paparazzi, it kept out one exhausted man just trying to drive to work without engaging in suburban warfare. The victim, let's call him Dave because every HOA story needs a long-suffering Dave, walked out of his house that morning ready for a normal weekend. Coffee in one hand, keys in the other, he pressed the garage door opener. The metal door rattled upwards, sunlight spilled in, and there it was, the blockade. Karen's Lexus, glinting smugly in the morning sun, stretched across his driveway like a luxury Berlin Wall. Dave froze. At first, he thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Karen's car had rolled accidentally, maybe she'd had a parking mishap. But then he saw it. The note, fluttering in the breeze under his windshield wiper like a flag of war. "Trim the roses," it read, "or next time I'll have your car booted." Let's pause here. Karen wasn't upset about noise, about parties, about fireworks on the 4th of July. She wasn't even mad about trash cans. This wasn't about community upkeep. This was about roses. Roses. Flowers. Dave's rose bushes, which, rumor had it, had grown a few inches taller than the HOA-approved standard. Apparently, those few extra inches of floral rebellion had pushed Karen past the point of no return. Dave wasn't sure what was worse, the car in his driveway or the sheer pettiness of the crime. This wasn't just a violation of neighborly trust, this was a flex, a power move. Karen wasn't content with handing out fines anymore. Now she was physically blocking freedom of movement. She had upgraded from HOA president to full-blown driveway warlord. Neighbors gathered, of course, because nothing in suburbia spreads faster than drama. One by one, garage doors creaked open, curtains twitched, phones came out. Soon, Dave's driveway had become the center ring of an impromptu circus. "What's going on?" whispered Mrs. Jenkins from across the street. Another neighbor whispered back, "Karen parked in his driveway." Gasps, shock. A toddler even shouted, "Bad lady!" Karen herself appeared moments later, strutting down the sidewalk like a conquering general surveying occupied territory. "Maybe next time," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "he'll remember that rules are rules." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. Dave's blood boiled. He'd seen pettiness before, but this was new. He called the police, of course. Surely blocking someone's driveway counted as an offense. The officer arrived, took one look at the Lexus, then at Karen, then at Dave, and sighed the sigh of someone who had seen this movie before. "It's on private property," the officer said, shrugging. "Nothing I can do. HOA rules, not ours." Karen smirked, arms crossed in victory. Next came the tow company. Surely they could remove the car. Nope. As it turned out, Karen had already called ahead. "If anyone tries to tow my Lexus," she had warned them, "I'll sue." And in a town where Karen chaired the HOA and golfed with the mayor, no tow company wanted that smoke. So Dave was trapped. His garage was sealed shut by a four-wheeled wall of entitlement, and the systems meant to help him, police, tow trucks, HOA appeals, were all Karen-proof. She had closed every loophole, tied every knot. To her, this was checkmate. She had proven her dominance once and for all. But what Karen didn't realize was that she had overplayed her hand. By blocking Dave's garage, she hadn't just inconvenienced him, she had created a spectacle, a scene so outrageous that it demanded escalation. Dave wasn't about to trim roses to appease a driveway dictator. No, he was about to plot revenge. And not just petty revenge, not egg the car revenge. We're talking about a plan so grand, so absurd, so cinematic that it would turn Karen's Lexus from a symbol of power into the ultimate suburban punchline. And that plan?
Oh, it starts in Fact 3, where Dave trades in his lawnmower for something with a little more horsepower, about 1,200 of them to be exact.
When faced with tyranny, most people do one of three things: cave in, call a lawyer, or passive-aggressively post about it on Facebook. But Dave wasn't most people. After standing in his driveway, staring at Karen's Lexus blockade like it was the world's shiniest middle finger, he decided it was time to do something bold, something memorable, something that would make Karen regret the day she ever taped that note to his windshield. At first, the ideas were small, childish even. Soap her windows, egg the car, cover it in sticky notes that spelled out petty. But Dave quickly realized two things. One, Karen was immune to petty pranks. She lived for them. She'd probably issue herself a violation just to feel powerful. Two, this situation called for escalation. The kind of escalation you don't just talk about at block parties, but tell your grandchildren about someday. So he did what all great strategists do. He called in reinforcements. His buddy Mark, a guy with more connections than a Swiss Army knife, Mark wasn't just the type of friend who'd help you move a couch. Mark knew people. And as it turned out, one of those people happened to run a heavy lift helicopter service. Now, let's pause here. You know you've crossed into legendary territory when the words Karen's Lexus and helicopter extraction appear in the same sentence. But Dave wasn't joking. If Karen wanted to block his garage, he'd take her game vertical. The plan was simple, at least in theory. Step 1, wait until Karen's Lexus was parked in its usual spot, gleaming like an alabaster monument to entitlement. Step 2, call in the helicopter crew, attach a rig to the car, and airlift it out of the driveway like it was an endangered rhino being relocated from the savannah. Step 3, drop it somewhere public, somewhere humiliating. Somewhere Karen couldn't possibly spin as anything but defeat. But where? That was the million-dollar question. Dave thought about plopping it in the middle of the local Walmart parking lot, or maybe dangling it above the HOA clubhouse like some kind of suburban chandelier. But Mark had the genius idea. What about the mayor's lawn, he said. And suddenly it all clicked. The mayor, Karen's golf buddy, her political shield, her silent enabler. If Karen was the queen of Maple Rest, the mayor was her loyal court jester. They were inseparable, the suburban power couple. Dropping the Lexus onto his lawn wouldn't just humiliate Karen, it would humiliate her entire regime. It was perfect, Shakespearean even. Revenge not just served cold, but airdropped with rotor blades thundering overhead. Dave couldn't help but laugh at the sheer absurdity of it. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He wasn't breaking laws. He wasn't damaging property. He was simply relocating an object. With style. Of course, this kind of operation required discretion. Only a handful of trusted neighbors were let in on the plan. They were sworn to secrecy, like members of a suburban resistance movement. Loose lips sink ships, Dave warned them. Or in this case, loose lips ground helicopters. The night before the operation, Dave barely slept. His mind raced with images of the helicopter hovering over Karen's Lexus, chains clanking, neighbors gasping, Karen shrieking, the mayor's face turning 50 shades of red as her beloved SUV descended onto his perfectly manicured grass. It was poetic. It was justice. It was inevitable. Because at that point, it wasn't just about roses. It wasn't just about one driveway being blocked. It was about principle, about standing up to bullies who hide behind HOA bylaws and clipboards, about proving that sometimes the only way to beat absurdity is with even greater absurdity. And so, with his plan in place, his crew ready, and his resolve stronger than ever, Dave prepared for the suburban showdown of the century. And when the big day arrived, the target was locked. Which brings us to Fact 4, the moment when suburban pettiness took flight and the mayor's lawn became ground zero for HOA history.
Every great revenge story needs a stage, a setting so perfect that the audience can't help but gasp when the curtain rises. For Dave, the question was simple. Where would the airlifted Lexus make the biggest impact? The HOA clubhouse was tempting. Imagine Karen's car swinging down like a chandelier at the very temple of her authority. The Walmart parking lot was also a contender because nothing screams public humiliation like Saturday shoppers pointing and laughing between runs to grab frozen pizza. But then came the lightning bolt idea, the mayor's lawn. Now, to understand why this idea was pure gold, you have to understand the mayor. He wasn't some distant political figure waving from parade floats once a year. No, in Maple Rest, the mayor was a suburban monarch in his own right. He played golf with Karen every weekend. He showed up at HOA meetings just to support his dear friend. He even once said in a speech that no one asked for, "Strong neighborhoods need strong leadership," and Karen embodies that. Yes, the man actually compared Karen to a pillar of democracy, as if taping angry notes to windshields was equivalent to writing the Constitution. So naturally, the mayor was Karen's safety net, her shield, her get-out-of-consequences-free card. Anytime a neighbor complained, Karen would smugly hint, "Well, I'll just have a word with the mayor." It was her ace in the hole. And that's why dropping her Lexus onto his immaculately trimmed golf course green lawn wasn't just hilarious, it was tactical. It was pulling the rug from under her entire empire. If Karen was the queen, the mayor was her court jester. Take them both down in one swoop, and the HOA dictatorship crumbles. Dave pictured it vividly. The mayor hosting one of his infamous weekend brunches, guests sipping champagne under big white tents, the scent of overpriced hors d'oeuvres wafting through the air, and then the sound of a helicopter. Heads tilt upward, champagne glasses freeze midair. Suddenly, Karen's Lexus descends from the heavens like a suburban Trojan horse, landing squarely on the mayor's pristine grass. Plates go flying, women clutch their pearls, men drop their golf forks. It's chaos. Beautiful, glorious chaos. But Dave wasn't just about shock value. He wanted precision. He coordinated with Mark and the chopper crew down to the minute. The plan was to snatch the Lexus at dawn, fly it across town while everyone was awake enough to notice but not yet out running errands, and then make the drop right when brunch was in full swing. Maximum audience, maximum humiliation. Of course, secrecy was key. If Karen got wind of this plan, she'd probably fortify her Lexus with steel chains and hire a lawyer to camp out in the driveway. So Dave kept his circle small. He whispered the plan like it was an underground heist. His allies nodded solemnly like members of a resistance movement preparing for the mission of a lifetime. As the day drew closer, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. It was like waiting for the season finale of your favorite show. Everyone knew something big was coming, but no one knew exactly how it would play out. The mayor's brunch guest list leaked, fueling excitement. "Perfect timing," Dave muttered, scanning the list like a general studying battle intel. Politicians, local business owners, even a news anchor. The audience couldn't be more perfect if it had been scripted. The night before, Dave stood in his garage, staring at Karen's roses swaying in the moonlight, that infamous note still folded on his workbench. He thought about backing down for half a second, but then he remembered the smugness in her voice, the smirk on her face when the cop shrugged and the tow company refused. That was the moment he realized there was no going back. The target was chosen. The stage was set, the players were in position. And when the curtain finally rose, it wasn't a polite HOA meeting. It was Fact 5, the helicopter showdown in the cul-de-sac that turned suburbia into a live action movie.
Suburban Saturdays usually sound like lawnmowers, kids bouncing basketballs, and maybe the faint hum of someone's leaf blower. But on this Saturday, the cul-de-sac didn't hum, it roared. Because instead of the usual soundtrack of suburbia, the air filled with the unmistakable chop of helicopter blades. At first, people thought it was just a news chopper, or maybe a medevac. But as the sound grew louder, rattling windows and shaking coffee cups off tables, neighbors spilled out of their houses. Pajamas, robes, slippers, it didn't matter. No one was missing this. Kids darted into the street, pointing at the sky. Dogs barked like the apocalypse was coming. And then, through the morning haze, it appeared. The helicopter. Not just any helicopter, a hulking, heavy-lift beast with chains dangling beneath it like metallic tentacles.
and parked directly in its crosshairs, Karen's Lexus. Now remember, this wasn't a stealth mission, this was theater. Dave wanted maximum visibility, and he got it. Every garage door in the cul-de-sac groaned open as neighbors leaned against their cars, phones raised high. This was better than cable, better than Netflix. This was live HOA warfare. Karen, of course, heard the commotion. She burst out of her house in a bathrobe and slippers, clutching her clipboard like a security blanket. Her jaw dropped as the helicopter descended, whipping her perfectly styled hedges into leafy chaos. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar. But the riggers weren't listening. They moved with military precision, snapping chains around the Lexus's frame. The car wobbled as the hooks locked into place, and the crowd gasped collectively. Kids squealed. A neighbor actually shouted, "Take her car to Mars!" Karen, panicked, rushed forward, trying to throw herself between the Lexus and the crew. But the force of the helicopter's downdraft sent her stumbling backward, clutching her robe like a soap opera star caught in the wind machine. Her neighbors? They didn't step in to help. They just filmed it. One even shouted, "Karen, wave to TikTok!" And then the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Lexus rose. Slowly at first, its tires lifting off the asphalt as if reluctant to leave the asphalt. Karen shrieked, "That's private property! That's mine!" Her words were swallowed by the rotor wash. Higher and higher it climbed, chains clanking, sunlight gleaming off its polished hood. To the crowd, it looked less like a car and more like a sacrifice being offered to the suburban gods. Phones cut every angle. Videos hit social media before the Lexus even cleared the tree line. Karen loses her car, trended within minutes. Meanwhile, Dave stood calmly at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, expression neutral. He didn't need to say anything. His silence said it all. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was a statement. The Lexus swung gently under the helicopter, like a luxury chandelier. Karen dropped to her knees, wailing as if her child had just been abducted. "Bring it back," she screamed. But the crowd wasn't sympathetic. They cheered. They clapped. One neighbor even broke into a slow clap, and soon the entire cul-de-sac joined in. It wasn't just a car leaving the neighborhood that morning. It was the end of an era. The era of fear, of clipboard tyranny, of notes taped to windshields. Karen's reign of HOA terror had finally met its match, and it was dangling 50 feet in the air. For Dave, this was sweet, sweet justice. He didn't say a word to Karen. He didn't need to. The roar of the helicopter, the cheers of the neighbors, and the sight of that Lexus shrinking into the distance said everything for him. But the real masterpiece wasn't in the takeoff. It was in the landing. Because fact 6, that's where Karen's Lexus made its final descent. Right onto the mayor's perfectly manicured lawn.
If the helicopter lift was the appetizer, the Lexus drop was the 5-course main event, served with a side of chaos and garnished with pure humiliation. The flight across town wasn't quiet. Oh no. This wasn't some stealthy covert mission. This was a spectacle. The Lexus swung beneath the helicopter like a trophy, glinting in the sun as it soared over stoplights and strip malls. Pedestrians stopped mid-step, pointing up in disbelief. Drivers slammed on brakes to take pictures. Social media exploded. Within minutes, #Flying Lexus trended nationwide. By the time the chopper approached City Hall, the whole town seemed to know. And wouldn't you know it? Perfect timing. The mayor's brunch was in full swing. Picture this: white tents on the mayor's sprawling lawn, champagne glasses clinking, trays of canapés circulating like edible currency. Politicians, business owners, and Karen's tight-knit circle of enablers mingling under the sun, congratulating themselves for another week of running the town. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, a low thrum. Conversations paused, heads tilted. Someone muttered, "Is that thunder?" But as the roar grew, napkins blew off tables and hats spun into the air. The guests squinted against the downdraft as the helicopter descended, rattling the silverware and flattening the carefully arranged centerpieces. And then
the pièce de résistance, Karen's Lexus dangling in the sky like some bizarre suburban UFO. Gasps filled the air. Champagne flutes froze mid-air. One elderly woman screamed, "It's the rapture!" But instead of angels, it was leather seats and a vanity plate that read, HOA Queen. The Lexus lowered slowly, gracefully, like a diva taking her final bow. The chopper steadied itself, and with a majestic thud, the car landed smack in the middle of the mayor's perfect lawn. Chaos erupted. Plates of shrimp cocktails went airborne. Guests stumbled backwards, shielding their faces from flying napkins. The mayor himself, red-faced and sputtering, screamed something that was lost in the rotor wash. His prized azaleas flattened. His lawn torn up like a battlefield. His dignity vaporized. And as for Karen, she wasn't there, but she didn't need to be. Her Lexus, her beloved chariot, her symbol of status, had just been turned into the world's most embarrassing lawn ornament. Photos snapped, videos rolled, and within minutes, the mayor's lawn was trending alongside #Flying Lexus. Memes poured in, captions like "new lawn decor" and "when HOA goes HOA overboard." Back in the cul-de-sac, Karen watched from her phone as live streams rolled in. Her face drained of color, neighbors crowded around their screens, laughing, gasping, rewinding the moment again and again. For them, it wasn't just entertainment. It was vindication. Years of fines, warnings, and petty tyranny all collapsing in one glorious moment of aerial justice. And the beauty of it all, Dave hadn't laid a finger on her Lexus. No scratches, no dents, no damage. He'd simply relocated it in the most public, humiliating way possible. Legally, murky. Morally, impeccable. Spiritually, oh, it was perfect. The mayor's brunch dissolved into mayhem. Guests scattered, reporters arrived, cameras flashed. What had begun as a symbol of HOA power now sat powerless, inert, and humiliated on the mayor's grass. It was suburban poetry in motion. For Dave, watching from his driveway via live stream, it was the sweet sound of victory. Not the petty kind, but the kind you tell as legend. This wasn't just revenge, it was a community exorcism, purging the neighborhood of its clipboard-wielding demon. And as the helicopter flew off into the horizon, chains clanking and mission complete, one thing was clear. Suburbia would never be the same. But if you thought Karen would disappear quietly into the night, think again. Fact 7 is where the fallout begins, and the once feared queen bee of the HOA becomes the laughingstock of an entire town.
Every empire eventually crumbles. Rome had barbarians, France had revolutions, Blockbuster had Netflix. And for Karen, the self-crowned queen of Maple Rest's HOA, her collapse came in the form of a Lexus sitting like a lawn gnome on the mayor's grass. The drop was only hours old when the internet did what it does best, meme it into oblivion. Screenshots of the Lexus perched awkwardly on the mayor's pristine lawn spread faster than dandelions in spring. Twitter, or X, depending on how hip you are, erupted with hashtags. Hashtag HOA Queen Down, hashtag Mayor's New Ornament, hashtag Flying Lexus. TikTok clips of the helicopter lifting the car racked up millions of views, set to songs ranging from Highway to the Danger Zone to Beyoncé's Irreplaceable. Even Instagram moms who usually posted sourdough bread pics got in on it, captioning their bread pics with, "At least Karen's car isn't in my yard." For years, Karen had ruled through fear. Neighbors dreaded her notes, her fines, her icy stares. She was less of a neighbor and more of a suburban supervillain with a clipboard. But now, she was a punchline. The power dynamics flipped overnight. The same neighbors who once whispered nervously at block parties now cackled openly at memes of her Lexus photoshopped onto Mount Rushmore, the Eiffel Tower, or floating in orbit next to the moon. And Karen, she was furious. She stormed into the HOA meeting that very week, ready to reclaim her throne. But instead of trembling board members hanging on her every word, she found an audience smirking behind their laptops. "This isn't funny," she barked, slamming her clipboard onto the table. "This was vandalism, harassment, terrorism." One brave board member finally said what everyone else was thinking. "Karen, you parked your car across his driveway. You started this." Gasps, murmurs, eyes darting. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't feared. She was challenged. Her face turned crimson, her voice rising an octave. "Do you realize who you're talking to?" she snapped. But that was the problem. Everyone did know who they were talking to. And for once, they weren't intimidated. Because once your car has been airlifted by helicopter and dropped on the mayor's lawn in front of half the town, you can never really recover your aura of authority. The coup de grace came when a neighbor passed around a petition to strip Karen of her HOA presidency. Within minutes, the paper filled with signatures. People who had silently endured her tyranny for years now lined up like voters in a historic election. "Enough is enough," Mr. Jenkins muttered as he signed. Even the HOA treasurer, long seen as Karen's loyal sidekick, quietly scribbled his name with a smirk. Karen tried everything. She threatened lawsuits. She invoked bylaws. She even claimed the mayor would deal with this insubordination. But here's the kicker. The mayor wanted nothing to do with her. After hosting a Lexus lawn ornament in front of the press, his political capital had tanked faster than a bod stock pick. He issued a curt statement distancing himself, saying, "The events of this weekend were unfortunate, and I had no knowledge of them in advance." Translation, Karen, you're on your own. The humiliation cut deep. This was a woman who once wielded fines like royal decrees. Now, she couldn't even rally a quorum. Neighbors who once flinched at her clipboard now laughed at her behind their curtains. The HOA newsletter, once dripping with Karen's authoritarian flair, now featured a meme of a helicopter in its header, submitted anonymously, of course. Karen had gone from HOA queen to internet clown. And the sting wasn't just the laughter, it was the loss of power. She was dethroned, defanged, and utterly exposed. But the story didn't end there, because when Karen fell, she dragged her allies down with her. Which brings us to fact 8, the boardroom betrayal that shattered what was left of her empire.
If the helicopter was the match and the memes were the gasoline, then the HOA board meeting was the explosion. Karen walked in expecting to reassert dominance. Clipboard? Check. Freshly pressed blazer? Check. Her usual aura of queen addressing her peasants? Double check. She strutted to the head of the table like nothing had happened, convinced she could shout her way back into power. But here's the problem with ruling by fear. Once the fear is gone, all that's left is resentment. And Karen had built years of resentment. Every $50 trash can fine, every angry note about mailbox paint, every smug rules are rules speech had piled up like dry kindling. And now, thanks to her airborne Lexus stunt, someone had finally lit the match. The meeting room was packed. More neighbors showed up than usual, phones ready, some with popcorn. You could feel the anticipation, like everyone knew they were about to witness history. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order, order," she barked, as if commanding troops on a battlefield. But instead of compliance, she got silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Finally, one board member, a usually quiet retiree named Linda, cleared her throat. "Karen," she said carefully, "don't you think this has gone too far?" Karen's head whipped around. "Too far? Too far? They stole my car. They dropped it on the mayor's lawn," she screeched. "I am the victim here." A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Not loud, but enough. Enough to crack the facade. Karen's eyes darted around the table, searching for allies. But the treasurer looked down. The secretary shuffled papers. Even her longtime golf buddy Carl leaned back, expressionless. Then came the coup. A motion from the floor. "I move to strip Karen of her presidency."
Gasps filled the room, followed by a second voice. I second that motion. Karen slammed her gavel again. Out of order. You can't do this. But oh, they could, and they did. Neighbors, emboldened by years of pent-up frustration, lined up to air their grievances. You fined me for a garden gnome. You threatened my kid for sidewalk chalk. You measured my grass with a ruler. It was like a confessional, except instead of forgiveness, it was payback. The vote was swift. One by one, hands raised. Yes, yes, yes. The tally was brutal. Karen, out. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. She sputtered, tried to invoke bylaws, threatened lawsuits, but no one was listening. The same people who once cowered under her clipboard now rolled their eyes. One even whispered, "Don't forget your Lexus." The room erupted in snickers. And just like that, the reign was over. The queen bee of Maple Rest was dethroned, stripped of her power, reduced to just another neighbor with no more authority than anyone else. Her clipboard might as well have been a piece of cardboard. For Dave, sitting quietly in the back, it was vindication sweeter than the helicopter drop itself. Not only had Karen been humiliated in front of the town, she'd been exiled from her own throne. This wasn't just revenge. This was systemic change. But Karen's downfall didn't end with her. Her alliance with the mayor, her cozy little network of enablers, that was about to unravel too. Because when Karen fell, she didn't just take herself down. She dragged the mayor into the mud with her. And that brings us to fact 9. The political fallout that shook Maple Rest's good old boys club to its core. So when the Lexus landed on his lawn, the optics were brutal. Local news ran split-screen footage. On one side, the Lexus dangling from the helicopter. On the other, the mayor shaking hands with Karen at last year's HOA banquet. Headlines screamed, "From clubhouse to crisis, mayor tied to HOA queen." And the residents? They were done. Years of frustration boiled over. The mayor always protected her, muttered one neighbor to a reporter. Now he's exposed. Petitions started circulating, calling for his resignation. Even the brunch guests, who had scrambled like startled pigeons when the Lexus dropped, whispered about how embarrassing it all was. The mayor tried damage control. He fined Karen for the lawn damage, a desperate attempt to prove his independence. But it was too little too late. Karen, now dethroned and humiliated, turned on him. In an interview with a local blogger, she hissed, "The mayor knew everything. He encouraged me to enforce those rules." It was like watching two villains betray each other in the final act of a bad buddy movie. Meanwhile, the town reveled in the spectacle. Memes didn't just target Karen anymore, they targeted the mayor. One viral edit showed him mowing his lawn around the Lexus with the caption, "New centerpiece for City Hall." Another showed him golfing with Karen, except instead of a golf cart, they were riding in the dangling Lexus. His approval rating plummeted faster than the car itself. And politically, it was a disaster. Opponents pounced, framing him as a symbol of everything wrong with local politics: nepotism, favoritism, and unchecked HOA power. Council meetings turned hostile, with residents shouting questions about flying cars and backroom deals. The man couldn't show his face at the grocery store without someone humming the Top Gun theme behind him. The fallout spread beyond politics, too. Local businesses quietly distanced themselves, canceling sponsorships for his annual golf fundraiser. His social media flooded with comments like, "Hey, when's the next Lexus drop?" Even his staff started polishing their resumes. No one wanted to go down with a sinking ship, or in this case, a flying SUV. For the first time, the mayor realized what Karen had always denied. She wasn't a queen, she was an anchor. And once that anchor crashed on his lawn, it dragged his entire reputation into the dirt. Karen had lost her HOA throne, but the mayor, he lost his credibility. Together, they had ruled Maple Rest like petty monarchs. Separately, they were just cautionary tales. Two figures who thought they were untouchable until gravity, rotor blades, and a very determined neighbor proved otherwise. And that brings us to fact 10, the final chapter. Because this wasn't just about a car or a mayor. It was about a community finally breaking free and a lesson in suburban justice that no one will forget.
Every story has a moral. Some are profound, like love conquers all. Others are practical, like never leave food out in bear country. But the moral of the Flying Lexus Saga? Never underestimate a fed-up neighbor with creativity, connections, and a helicopter on speed dial. In the days after the Lexus drop, Maple Rest transformed. The neighborhood once defined by fear and fines now buzzed with a strange kind of joy, the joy of liberation. It was as if the very air smelled fresher, the lawns looked greener, and even the roses, yes, those infamous roses, seemed to bloom taller. Without Karen lurking with her clipboard, kids rode bikes freely, chalk art returned to sidewalks, and neighbors actually smiled at each other. The story spread far beyond the cul-de-sac. News outlets picked it up, national talk shows invited HOA experts to discuss it. One late-night comedian quipped, "Some people call AAA when they're blocked in, others call Delta." It became more than a neighborhood dispute. It became a parable about power, pettiness, and poetic justice. And what about Dave? He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His revenge was already immortalized in meme culture, YouTube compilations, and neighborhood lore. He became the guy everyone waved to, the silent hero who had pulled off the most legendary act of suburban defiance in history. But the real lesson wasn't about helicopters or Lexuses. It was about balance, about how one person's obsession with control can poison a community, and how sometimes it takes something outrageous to reset the scales. Karen believed rules kept order, but she forgot that respect, fairness, and common sense keep harmony. Without those, rules are just weapons. And for Karen, her rules became her downfall. The Lexus, once her throne, turned into her coffin of credibility. When it touched down on the mayor's lawn, it buried not just her reputation, but the illusion of her invincibility. The HOA board, once cowed into silence, now operated with transparency. No more secret fines, no more arbitrary citations. Decisions were debated, not dictated. And every so often, when tensions rose, someone would mutter, "Careful, or we'll need another helicopter." Laughter would break the tension. The lesson had stuck. Even the mayor's humiliation carried value. Politicians in neighboring towns suddenly reconsidered their cozy ties with HOA tyrants. They realized that siding with petty power could end with their front yards turned into circus arenas. In a way, the Flying Lexus became a case study in accountability, not through elections, not through courts, but through sheer unforgettable spectacle. Karen eventually moved. Rumor had it she sold her house quietly, retreating to a distant town where no one knew her name. But she couldn't escape the internet. Everywhere she went, people recognized the memes. She was no longer HOA President Karen, she was Flying Lexus Karen. Her legacy was cemented not in HOA history books, but in the digital Hall of Fame for public embarrassments. The rest of the neighborhood, they flourished. Without her constant oversight, community events returned, barbecues, garage sales, even block parties. Kids laughed without fear of fines, homeowners decorated their lawns with wild abandon, and Dave, he planted more roses, dozens of them, bushes taller, brighter, fuller than before. A living monument to his victory. So what's the lesson? Maybe it's that power built on intimidation is fragile. Maybe it's that humor and audacity can sometimes achieve what legal systems can't. Or maybe it's simpler. Don't block someone's garage, or you might just find your car on the evening news, dangling like a chandelier. Either way, Maple Rest learned that sometimes justice doesn't roll in on wheels. Sometimes it flies.
Which brings us to the final act, the outro. Because the Flying Lexus wasn't just an HOA feud gone wild. It was a reminder to all of us about pettiness, power, and why you should never mess with the wrong neighbor. So here we are, one HOA, one Karen, one Lexus, and one helicopter later, and suburbia will never look the same again. What started as a petty note about rose bushes spiraled into a full-scale suburban showdown that went viral, humiliated an HOA tyrant, embarrassed a mayor, and left the rest of us with the kind of story you just can't make up. And that's the thing about HOA dramas, isn't it? They start small. A trash can is out too long, a mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige, a rose bush that dares to grow tall. But when power goes unchecked, when clipboards turn into crowns and bylaws turn into weapons, neighborhoods stop being communities and start being kingdoms. And sometimes the only way to bring balance back is through bold, absurd acts of defiance. Karen thought she was untouchable. She had the rules, the fines, and the mayor. But in the end, none of it saved her from becoming a meme, a headline, and a cautionary tale. And the real kicker? She did it to herself. If she'd just parked in her own driveway and minded her own business, she'd still be queen. Instead, she'll forever be remembered as the woman whose Lexus flew. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Dave's shoes? Would you have booked the helicopter or gone with something less airborne? Drop your answers in the comments. And don't forget, hit like, subscribe to HOA Wars, and share this video with that one friend who's this close to feuding with their HOA. Because when it comes to suburban showdowns, truth really is stranger and funnier than fiction.